Okay, we're going to continue on with Bill Wallace's A Dog Called Kitty. And there he is right there on the picture. All right, so today we're going to do chapter 9 and 10. So follow along and enjoy. Chapter 9. It was a week later at supper time when I finally came up with a plan for keeping Kitty away from the poisoned meat. Chucky was sitting in his chair across from me. He was 5 now, and he'd been trying to act real grown up since he started kindergarten this year. He didn't squeal and whine like when he was little. His table manners were better too. He didn't slop around in his food anymore, and it'd been weeks since he'd turned his drink over and splashed it across the table. I wasn't paying much attention this evening because I was still figuring on a way to protect my pup. Then, all of a sudden, Chucky set up a howl like I hadn't heard since he was 3. He went to screaming and crying like he was about to die. Before anybody knew what was happening, he turned his plate over, spilled milk in the mashed potatoes, and liked to yank the tablecloth off the table when he jumped up. He went screaming through the house. Mama took a big scare seeing him act like that, so she took out after him, trying to catch him to see what was wrong. It scared me some too. Even if he was my little brother, always getting into my stuff and messing up my room, even if he never minded me when I told him to do something, like I said, he was still my brother. And I could tell by the way he was crying that he was hurt. From the fuss that he was setting up, I was afraid he was hurt bad, even though I didn't know what hurt him. Dad was worried too. We got up and started off after Mama and Chucky. Mama chased him around the house twice before she finally caught up with him. He was hurt and squealing mad, kicking and crying and trying to hold on to Mama for comfort. Dad and I gathered around them. It took Mama a long time to pet and love him till he calmed down. "What is it, Chucky?" she kept asking. "Where's my little boy hurt? What's wrong?" Finally, Chucky calmed down enough that caught his breath. With a shaking hand, he pointed at his mouth. "It's hot," he cried. "Something real hot." Mama frowned at Dad, and Dad frowned at me. I shrugged, not knowing what Chucky meant either. "Hot!" Chucky whined again. Dad slapped himself on the leg. "Why, that little thief," he said. "I bet he—" Dad never finished his sentence. He turned and trotted off for the kitchen. I figured he was onto something, so I followed. Mama, still fussing and making over Chucky, picked him up and followed us too. Dad was in the kitchen when we found him. Mama and I kept looking at each other, real puzzled like. Dad was digging through the gooey mess of mashed potatoes and milk in Chucky's plate. All at once, he let out a sly chuckle, slapped his knee. "Just what I figured. Look here." Mama and I frowned. She held up a bright green-colored little thing, shook it back and forth. That little scamp must have reached over in my plate and swiped this while I wasn't watching. Mama tilted her head. "What is it?" Dad laughed. "Hot pepper." "Hot pepper," she squalled. "Well, no wonder." Chucky was still whining. When he saw that green pepper Dad was holding up, his eyes got real big and he started crying again. "Hot!" he complained. I felt my face kind of wrinkle up with my sympathy for that little fella. I'd latched onto one of Dad's hot peppers before, back when I was younger, and didn't know better. I could still remember the burning, like I'd swallowed a mouthful of fire. That thing burned clean from my lips to the bottom of my stomach. Dad took Chucky from Mama. and he held him under his arm and kind of pitched him up in the air a couple of times. Come on, son. I know what'll take care of that old Pepper. He got Chucky a piece of bread and a glass of milk. When he gobbled that down, Dad got ice cream out of the freezer, and we all had a bowl. When we finished, Mama started scraping the scraps off of our plates into the bowls to feed Kitty and the cats. Be sure you get the rest of that pepper out of Chucky's plate, Dad warned. Those cats will go climbing up every tree in the country if they catch hold of that pepper. That's when the idea hit me. I felt my eyes kind of pop wide open when a smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. Hey, Dad, can I have a couple of peppers? Dad frowned, leaned his way to the side. You must have forgot the last time you tried one of those, Ricky. You acted might near like Chucky. Danced around the house for 10 minutes, yowling and complaining how hot your mouth was. I remember, Dad, only it's not for me. He tilted his head the other way. What do you mean? What do you want them for? I smiled. Kitty. Mama turned away from the sink where she was doing the dishes. That pup's got more sense than to eat one of those things. Not if I wrap it up in some hamburger meat, I answered. The way he gobbles his food, he wouldn't even stop to sniff it. Dad shook his head. That's mighty cruel to pull on the pup, he said sternly. We always tried to teach you to be kind to animals. Mama jumped in. A trick like that isn't right. I waved my hands trying to cut them off. It's a mighty cruel thing to do, I agreed. Only it's not a trick, it's serious business. Dad folded his arms across his stomach. Just what do you mean, serious business? I leaned across the table, twisted Dad's jar of hot peppers in my hands. You know how you're telling me about those trappers baiting them coyote getters with raw meat? Yeah. Well, I was just thinking, we can't keep Kitty in a pen or tied up. It's just a matter of time before he finds him some of that meat and gets into the traps, right? Dad nodded. I'm afraid so. I felt my smile getting bigger. We can't keep him from roaming around, but what if we keep him from messing with the meat that he finds around those traps? Dad frowned suddenly, changed to a grin, and when he figured out what I was talking about, you mean set out some meat for him and load it with hot peppers? I nodded. Yes. Then when he eats it, he'll get a dose of what Chucky got. Maybe that way he won't be eating meat and stuff unless it's in his bowl. Dad took a jar of hot peppers and laid 2 of them on a plate. Sounds like just might work. Worth a try anyhow. I told Mama to wait a while, to call the cats and eat. I took the first wad of hamburger and laid it near the path Kitty always took when he came running from the barn for his food. The second one I laid out by Beauty's pen. I knew Kitty'd find it there when Beauty and I went riding later this evening. Dad figured Kitty might get wise to the hamburger, so he had Mama cut up some raw steak and we loaded it with peppers too. Kitty did just like we figured. Mama banged the pans together and yelled, "Here, Kitty, Kitty, Kitty." I could see him waiting by the edge of the barn. He stood there, just like always, waiting for the cats to come to the house first. Mama had been feeding them on top of the screened-in porch, but I figured Kitty was still planning for him to get into his feed bowl. And he wanted to give them a chance to get there first so he could run them off. The cats knew his tricks though, So when he saw them climbing up on the screen to get to the top of the porch where their own food bowl was at, he came on to the house. The ball of hamburger meat was sitting beside the path that led him to the barn, to the back gate. At first, I thought Kitty was going to ignore the meat. Then after he'd passed it, he came to a screeching stop, sniffed the air a couple of times, and turned back. Sure enough, he found the hamburger. He grabbed it, kind of pitched it in the air, and opened his mouth real big. Gulped it down without hardly chewing. Then, to my surprise, he came trotting onto the house like nothing whatsoever was wrong. With a frown, I scratched at my head. You reckon the pepper fell out before he got it? Dad only smiled. Just give it time. That thing just hasn't hit bottom yet. Kitty squeezed under the gate. He got a look around to make sure that there wasn't any cats within reach. Then he trotted on to his feed bowl. All at once, he stopped dead in his tracks. His floppy ears perked up, almost straight over his head. Then he doubled over, looking between his front legs, like to see if there was ants or something that was chewing on his belly. That hot pepper must have really hit him then. He started shaking his head, digging at his mouth with both paws, like he'd got him a mouthful of bumblebees. He went to howling and yelping, jumping up in the air and turning a complete circle before he hit the ground. I felt sorry for him, but even feeling sorry for him, I had to slap my hand over my mouth to keep from laughing at the way he was acting. He'd flop over on his back and with his feet kicking in the air. Then he'd jump up and start turning circles. All of a sudden, he'd fall over and start pawing at his mouth again, yowling and howling all the time. Dad was doubled over laughing. Mama kind of got on to both of us, saying how mean we were to that poor old pup. But all the time she was scolding us, I could see that kind of twinkle in her eye and the way she had to fight the corners of her mouth to keep from smiling. It was long before Mama took pity on him. She went inside and came back with a big bucket full of water. Kitty was still pitching and reeling around, but when he saw the water bucket, he came on the run. In all my days, I never saw an animal drink so much water. He must have stood there with his long floppy tongue in that bucket for 30 minutes. He'd stop now and then to catch his breath. Then he'd go right back to drinking. When he was through, I could swear I heard his stomach slosh as he walked. It took him 3 days before he got into the meat again. This time, it was one of the pieces of steaks I'd hid around the house. About bedtime one evening, we heard his yowling and howling outside. Dad went to look, and when he came back, he asked if he'd hid any of that meat over by the air conditioner. I told him I had, and he said that Kitty had found it. After that, we never had any more trouble with Kitty snitching strange meat. The 3 other pieces of meat I had stashed around the place were left untouched. I don't even reckon he sniffed them. He'd eat hamburger in his feed bowl, but he always smelled it real good first. The big test came around Thanksgiving vacation. Beauty and Kitty and I hadn't done much riding because school kept me pretty busy. I'd ride some in the afternoon, but we never managed to get very far from the house. In November, we had a 4-day vacation for Thanksgiving. The first morning out of school, Beauty and I took off to see some of the country. Kitty came along too. Lately, he'd found that there were birds running around. Quail is what Dad called them. He said that they were a game bird and that Kitty looked at him like he was part Irish setter, a good hunting breed. Anyhow, Kitty would go sniffing through that tall brown blades and fall and fall grass and sooner or later stumble on a bunch of those quail. I watched him once. He came along all crouched down. Then, when he was right on them, he'd jump up and land in the middle of the bunch. Of course, he never caught anything. They always flew just a few seconds before he landed, beating their wings and drumming their crisp fall air as they scattered every which way. Kitty liked to chase after them, but when he figured he'd ranged far enough, he'd circle back to Beauty and me. It was during one of those sniffing hunts for birds that he stumbled across the coyote getter. Just like Dad said, there was a stick with a red ribbon nearby. All you could see of the trap, though, was a big chunk of raw meat, free for the taking. When I saw what Kitty was sniffing at, I yanked Beauty around and headed back. My heart sank clear down to the bottom of my stomach, because I realized Beauty and I were too far away. There was no way I could save my pup if he took a notion to eat some free beef. We couldn't reach him in time. One bite and he'd be dead before we got there. Kitty had a way of expressing him. Kitty had learned his lesson from the hot peppers. I held my breath as he sniffed the meat, then laughed out loud when he heisted his leg and peed on it. Kitty had a way of expressing himself, telling everybody just what he thought about that meat. I never worried about him getting into those traps after that day. And after Thanksgiving vacation, I didn't feel a bit bad about going back to school. It didn't worry me to leave him because I knew he'd be all right while I was gone. Wow, he actually did learn something from his little tricks. He actually lifted his leg and peed on the meat. Okay, chapter 10. By the week before Christmas break, I was so all-fired excited I couldn't sit still in my desk. All I could think about was riding Beauty and playing and eating the good holiday food Mama'd fix. By the time Christmas vacation came, I was ready for some adventures and excitement. Things had been pretty boring around our farm. I hadn't had much time to ride Beauty and roam with my pup. I'd been too busy helping Dad with the cattle. I was about to pop when the bus dropped me off. After the last day of school, Kitty was waiting for me by the windmill. Like usual, I was pretty good about dodging out of the way before he jumped on me. But today, I let him jump up and put his paws on my chest and lick my face. Then he headed off for the house at a run. All the way, I kept telling Kitty about the fun things that we were going to do now that I was out of school for a couple of weeks. When I reached the house and went running in to put up my books and the Christmas things I'd made at school, all of my excitement and feeling good and being happy just whooshed out of me. Dad was on the telephone. Mama shushed me. The second I came in the door, I could tell by the look on their faces that something was wrong, something serious. I kind of held my breath, trying to be real quiet. Dad was ending up on his telephone, talking on the phone. He nodded his head and frowned. "Let me call you back, Martha. I'll see what I can do." Then he hung up the phone and kind of sank down in the chair. Mama went over and put her hand on his shoulder, smothered his hair back off his forehead. "How bad is he?" she said. "Are all the kids all right?" Dad shook his head. I could see a tear roll down his cheek. He tried to wipe it away. Martha said Ben was in critical condition. He's got a concussion and multiple fractures. He's in a coma. And the doctors won't tell her what his chances are. Dad cleared his throat. "Alex and Teresa, were with him when he had the wreck. Alex is dead. Teresa just got a broken leg and a scratch on her arm. Guess being in the back seat is what saved her. I could see Dad's bottom lip quivering. See how hard it was for him to keep from crying. Martha said that she would have been with them, but she got a touch of the flu and stayed at the house. He stopped them. Mama sat on his lap and snuggled him up, kissing him on the cheeks and holding him tight. Martha was Dad's sister, my aunt. It had been a long time since we had seen them and their 2 kids, Alex and Teresa. I was only about Chucky's age when we last went to visit, so I didn't remember them very well at all. But watching how bad Dad was hurting over what had happened, I couldn't help hurting too. I went over and sat down on his lap beside Mama, loved him up like she was doing, tried to make him feel better. Finally, Mama said, "Is there anything we can do? Any way we can help her?" Dad bit down on his lip. "She asked me to come. She wants me to be with her, help. But I just don't see how," he stammered. I don't see how I can get away. There's so much needs done around here. We got 3 heifers coming in with calves any time now. And with the snow that's supposed to come soon, I'll have to haul hay to the ones that we got out on pasture. And Mama got up on her feet. She patted him on the leg and then, holding his hand, helped him up. "Nonsense, Nick. Your sister needs you, and you got to go. Ricky and I can take care of the cows. Let's go get your clothes packed." She took his hand and led him toward the stairs. Dad stopped and pulled his hand from hers. "That's too much for you to handle alone, Helen," he said. It's just better. Call Martha and I'll tell her. I just better call Martha and tell her." "No," Mama's stern tone cut him short. "She's your only sister. And after losing her only son and maybe her husband in a car wreck, Martha needs you. You'd feel guilty from now on if you didn't go. I'd feel guilty about leaving you with all the work to do around here," he argued. "There's too much lifting and pulling and straining. If you're wearing yourself out and get sick, I'll never forgive myself." Mama stood up on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. "Us womenfolk have been lifting and pulling and straining about as long as menfolk. Besides, I've got Ricky to help me. He's pretty stout for a 10-year-old. And what I can't handle, I'm sure he can." I rushed over beside them. "That's right, Dad. I've been with you to feed the cows. I know how much to give them, and I can lift hay bales might near as good as you. And I've watched you pull calves before," Mama added, "and I know the signs of milk fever if I need to call the vet. Now, your sister needs you, Ricky, and I can manage for a few days while you're gone." "But," Dad started in again. Mama put her finger to his lips. "Now, hush. No more argument. Let's get you packed, and then we'll call Martha and tell her that you're on your way." Dad knew when he was licked. He followed Mama upstairs without another word, and when they were gone, my head was all in a spin. There had never been a bad car wreck with anybody I knew before. I guess it's something that happens so fast and unexpected. It just takes time for your head to take it all in. Takes time for your mind to catch up with the way your heart's pounding and the way all sorts of feelings go flooding through. A car wreck is a bad thing. And Dad leaving us, even if it was for just a few days, well, that was a bad thing too. I sat down on the couch and turned the TV on. It didn't help much, though. What did help was when Chucky finished playing in his room and came down wanting me to help him with his school stuff. His kindergarten class was studying letters. He wanted to write some letters on some paper. Then he'd try to tell me what the letter was and write them by himself on a piece of paper. He did pretty good, and with most of them only kept getting a little B, P, and D all mixed up. Working with him kept both of us busy. Kept our minds off Dad. Chucky and I worked on letters while Mama was fixing supper. And after we finished eating, Mama told Chucky to put on his big coat, and we sat out to do the chores. Feeding was a snap. Dad had the truck filled with hay, and the first time out, all we had to do was drive through the pasture and pitch it. Mama drove the truck, and I sat in the back. I'd use the wire cutters to snap the baling wire, then pitch it out, chunk at a time. That way, the cows were all spread out and could eat without butting one another and fighting over the hay. Having them spread out made it easier to count and look them over. We checked to make sure that there was no bad wires cuts and none of them were sick. 3 cows were ready to have calves. Counting was special important with what was going on. Dad says it never fails that when their baby's ready to come, they'll wander off from the rest of the bunch, find a nice private place to bring a fresh new life into this world. Sure enough, the second day Dad was gone, we came up 1 heifer short. Mama and I counted twice, just to make sure. Then we headed off for the Rock Hill to see if she was all right. I found her holed up in a plum thicket near some big red sandstone boulders. Her new calf was with her, already standing on his wobbly legs and trying to get some milk. I figured the smart thing to do was herd her back to the small pen by the house. That way, we could keep an eye on her and the baby and make sure that they were all right and not to have a prowl around the Rock Hill trying to find where she and the calf were hidden next time. Kitty was with me, so I decided to send him in after her. Go get her, boy. Bring him out for me. Kitty cocked his ears and gave me a funny look. Go on, I urged. Go. Bring him out. I pointed and she just looked at me real dumb-like. Well, we'd never worked cows together, so I figured he didn't know what I was wanting him to do. I picked up a stick and started into the plum thicket, pounding the brush as I went. Come on, Kitty. All you got to do is go barking and chase her out of the other side. We're going to herd her back to the house. I was so proud I nearly popped. Kitty and I were about halfway into the thicket when he seemed to catch on to the game that we were playing. He started barking, went tearing him ahead of me toward the cow. I figured he was going to run her out and take her clear to the lot, and all I'd have to do was to follow. Only when Kitty came face to face with that old cow, that cow didn't run. Instead, she ducked her head, threatened by shaking her horns back and forth in his face. Kitty yelped. Kitty barked at her some more. Made her snort and paw at the ground. Then before I knew what was happening, she charged him. Kitty yelped and came running back to me for protection. And here came that mad heifer right behind. She was running hard, cracking branches and brush as she came. No, Kitty, I yelled. Take her the other way. Only Kitty was chasing him, and the only thing that he could think was getting back to me, where he'd been safe. I spun around and lit out. Kitty shot past so close he nearly knocked my feet from under me. That left me between Kitty and the mad cow who was chasing him. I was running hard and scared. I didn't notice that she stopped chasing me when we reached the edge of the plum thicket. There was a barbed wire fence about 50 feet away. I ran for it hard as I could, made a flying dive like a base runner, belly sliding into home plate. Only then did I take time to see where she was. The old cow was back in the thicket with her calf and the old cow was back in the thicket with her calf. Kitty came trotting up beside me, wagging his tail and acting like nearly getting run down by a mad cow was nothing more than a big game. You stinking coward, I glared at him. You nearly got me killed. You're nothing but a coward. He tried to jump up on me and I pushed him back with my knee. Some cow dog you are. You're supposed to keep her from getting me, not get her to chase me, dummy. I still had hopes, though. So we tried the same thing again. Just like before, Kitty rushed in and got that old heifer all stirred up, and when she chased him, he came straight for me. This time, though, she didn't stop at the edge of the thicket. She ran me clean to the barbed wire fence. Mama and Chucky finally found us. I guess it was because of all those commotion and yelling I was doing at Kitty. I told her what Kitty was doing, and she told me to hold on to him so that he wouldn't get the cow all excited. Then she and Chucky picked up some rocks and started chunking at the plum thicket. Sure enough, the cow led her calf out to the other side, and with Mama and Chucky throwing rocks behind her, it was no time before she reached the house. I was right disgusted with my dog. Bringing the cow to the house was something that I should have been man enough to do myself. Instead, Mama had to do it with the help of a little 5-year-old. It was downright embarrassing. All right, so that's chapter 9 and 10 of A Dog Called Kitty. And we will do 11 and 12 next time. So I want you to think about, is there anything else that's going to happen while Dad is away? And is Alex's daddy going to make it, or is he going to pass away? All right, some things for you to think about. A Dog Called Kitty by Bill Wallace. Bye-bye.